The archivist arrived at her door with a letter of removal and left 4 hours later, having told the king something no one had said to him in 87 years. His name was Edric. He was 63, had served the Velanthor archive for 40 of those years, and had never once returned from an assignment with the task incomplete. He had catalogued death records. He had authenticated land seizures. He had, on 2 occasions, delivered formal notices of exile to men who wept and begged and threw things. He had done all of it with the same unhurried composure, the same measured step, the same sense that the documents he carried were larger than either the giver or the receiver, and that his role was simply to ensure they arrived. He was not prepared for Mira Callanth. She was in the lower east wing when he found her, in the alcove the archive staff used to sort new acquisitions before they were logged and shelved. The morning light came through a narrow window and landed across her hands. She had ink on her left wrist, a smear of it below the heel of her palm, and she was working through a stack of bound courier records with the quiet speed of someone who had done this particular task so many times it had ceased to require her full attention. A catalogue sheet lay half-filled beside her. She did not look up when he opened the door. "I will be done with this section by the midday bell," she said. "If you need the Eastern Acquisition Room, I can move." "I am not here for the room," Edric said. She looked up then. She was not what the court had described. That was the first thing he noticed, and it unsettled him in ways he would spend the next 4 hours trying to articulate. The court's language for Mira Callanth was all erasure. She was Omega-ranked, lower house, a cataloguer who had been permitted to remain after her family's dissolution because she was useful and quiet and cost almost nothing. The court used words like negligible and unremarkable, and when they were being precise, forgettable. He had read the removal notice himself before sealing it. It used the phrase "without significant standing" twice, in 2 different clauses. She was not forgettable. Her face was angular, the jaw strong, the eyes a brown, so dark they read as black in certain lights, and as something closer to amber when the window hit them directly. There was a stillness in her that was not the stillness of someone who did not matter. It was the stillness of someone who had learned, very carefully, which movements were safe to make. "Then what do you need?" she asked. He had the letter in his coat. He had delivered it dozens of times. The formal gesture, the seal, the words that meant "pack your things, your presence is no longer required." He reached for it. His hand stopped. He was not, in general, a man given to hesitation, but something stopped him in that moment that he could not name yet. Something in the quality of her attention, in the way she set her papers down with exactly the care of someone who expected to return to them, in the small brown ink smear on her wrist that was the mark of someone who had been working here, had been working at this specific task, for a long time. "What is your name?" he asked, which was not what he had come to say. "Mira Callanth. You know it. It is on the letter." He had not shown her the letter. She returned to her cataloguing. She had known something was coming for 3 weeks. It was not a premonition in any mystical sense. Mira did not traffic in mysticism, which was perhaps ironic, given what had been happening to her since the night in the Great Hall 6 weeks ago. It was simpler than that. She had been in the archive long enough to understand how the institutional machinery worked. Things moved in a particular sequence here. First the whisper campaigns, then the formal objections, then the paperwork. The whisper campaigns had started the day after the Great Hall. The formal objections had been filed, she knew, because she had processed 3 routing slips that passed through her classification desk before being redirected, and 2 of them had her name in the metadata. The paperwork had been coming. She had simply decided not to leave before it arrived. The night in the Great Hall had not been her intention. She had been there because the acquisition ledgers for the Winter Court required a physical count against the displayed inventory, which meant she needed access to the hall during the setup hours. She had been counting silver candelabras in the far west alcove, which no one visited, when the Alpha King's wolf had walked the length of the hall and stopped beside her. not near her, beside her, the wolf, and she had seen it before, at distances, the massive silver-grey shape that moved through the grounds in the early mornings, stood with its shoulder at her hip, and it pressed its head against the side of her waist, and it stayed there. She had not moved. She had not screamed or run or called for help, because those responses had not occurred to her. What had occurred to her was to set down her counting ledger very carefully on the nearest table, and then to bring her hand up slowly and rest it against the side of the wolf's neck. It was warm, warmer than she had expected. The fur was dense, and her fingers went into it up to the knuckle. The wolf made a sound, low, not aggressive, the kind of sound that meant something she did not have a word for. There had been witnesses, a set-up crew of 4, and 2 of the High Court attendants, and Lady Alindra Voss. She had not used that name, because the banned names were institutional, but the woman whose title approximated to it, the senior councillor's designated mate candidate for the king, who had been crossing the hall toward the antechamber, and had stopped in the doorway and seen all of it. That was the night the machinery had started moving. Edric set the letter on the sorting table. He did not push it toward her. He set it down, and he sat down across from her in the spare chair that lived in all archive workrooms in the palace, and he looked at her cataloguing sheet. "You organized the provenance cross-reference system," he said. She did not look up. "Yes. That was not a small project. It took 14 months. He knew the system. He used it regularly. It had transformed the archive's retrieval capacity in a way that everyone who used it had noticed, and no one had thought to attribute to anyone specific, because the person who had built it was Omega-ranked and lower house, and the kind of person the court's categories meant you did not think to credit." "How long have you been in the archive?" he asked. 7 years. "And before that?" "I was in the household records office of the Callanth estate, until the estate was dissolved." She turned to the next page of courier records and made 3 notations in quick succession. "I know what the letter is. You can give it to me." He did not give it to her. He was trying to understand something, and he was not yet sure he had enough information to understand it. He had been sent here by the Alpha King, not directly, but through the administrative chain that meant the same thing, with a specific instruction. The archive cataloguer in the lower east wing was to be formally removed from her position and escorted from the palace grounds before the end of the month. The reason given in the administrative order was operational restructuring. The reason everyone in the administrative chain understood, without it being written, was that Lady Alindra had filed a formal petition before the council citing inappropriate proximity to the king's wolf, inappropriate status relative to proximity, and a need for clarity regarding the selection process that was now formally underway. The wolf had chosen her. That was the thing everyone was skating around, and no one was saying directly. In Edric's 40 years in the archive, he had come to understand that the things the court never said directly were always the most important things. And the thing the court was not saying directly right now was, the king's wolf had chosen this woman, in front of witnesses, and now Lady Alindra was doing everything within her considerable institutional power to make that woman disappear before the significance of what had happened could be formally acknowledged. "Tell me something," Edric said. She waited. "When the wolf came to you in the Great Hall, what did you do?" A pause. She set her pen down. "I put my hand on it," she said. "Were you afraid?" She considered this with the precision of someone who preferred accurate answers to reassuring ones. "I was surprised. I don't think I was afraid. It felt—" She stopped. "What did it feel like?" "It felt like something I had not expected to feel," she said carefully. "Like something that had been very far away for a long time was suddenly very close. I don't know how to describe it more precisely than that. I'm not sure I need to." Edric looked at the letter on the table. Then he stood up, took the letter, put it back in his coat, and said, "I need to go to the records room." He spent 2 hours in the deep archive. The Deep Archive was not formally restricted, but it was the kind of place that required both specific knowledge of the cataloguing system and a reason to be there that outweighed the considerable effort of navigating it. Edric had both. He had been, before he was the Archive's senior archivist, the Deep Archive's junior cataloguer, and he knew the classification system the way he knew the layout of his own rooms, not by reading the map, but by having walked the corridors until the turns were in his body. He was looking for suppression records. The Valanthor Archive held records of every significant supernatural event in the territory going back 400 years. Most of what the court considered significant was political. But at the back of the atmospheric events classification, Classification 9, subsection 4, which most people who navigated the archive knew as a dead end, there were records of a different kind. Records the court had, over generations, developed an institutional habit of not discussing. He found what he was looking for in the third cabinet. He sat on the stone floor of the Deep Archive with the cabinet open and a single lamp lit, and he read for an hour and 15 minutes. And then he sat still for another 10 minutes, which was not something Edric did. He was a man who read a document, formed a view, and acted. He did not sit still. But the document he had just read required a moment, because what he had found was this. 87 years ago, the current Alpha King's grandmother, Regent Councillor Thessaly Dawn, had commissioned a suppression. The mate bond of the then Crown Prince, Caius Valanthor, had awakened when he was 19. The girl it had awakened toward was a lower house healer's assistant named Lena, who was, by all accounts, ordinary in every political sense. Thessaly Dawn had found this unacceptable. The bond had been chemically suppressed, using a compound that the archive recorded simply as the grey preparation, administered in the prince's food over a period of 3 weeks, without his knowledge. The records showed it had worked. The bond had gone dormant. The records also showed something else, in a small notation in the margin that Edric suspected no one had read in decades. The grey preparation did not destroy the bond. It did not dissolve the thread. It compressed it. Suppressed bonds, according to the notation, written in the hand of the court physician who had administered the preparation and who had clearly been troubled enough to want the truth recorded somewhere. Do not die. They wait. And when the bond finds its true anchor again, it does not begin, it completes. 87 years. The bond had been waiting for 87 years. And now the wolf had walked the length of the great hall and pressed its head against Mira Calanth's waist, and Lady Alindra was filing institutional removal petitions, and the Alpha King had signed off on a removal order without knowing, without having been told, what he had actually signed. Edric went directly to the king's offices. He did not have an appointment. He had never in 40 years needed one, because he carried the archive's institutional authority, and in Valanthor that authority was one of the few things that moved without requiring the usual chain of access requests. The administrative secretary at the outer door looked at his identification and looked at his face and stood aside. He was shown into the inner office, which was a long room with tall windows looking north, where Caius Valanthor was standing at the large table reviewing what appeared to be border survey maps. He was 31. He had dark hair, cut short, and the particular physical scale that his bloodline produced, broad across the shoulders, unhurried in the way he moved, occupying rooms in a way that changed the weight of the air. He looked up when Edric came in. "Archivist," he said. It was not a question. "Highness." Edric set his coat on the chair nearest the door, not waiting for an invitation, which was his prerogative, and which the king had never contested. "I need to speak with you about the removal order for the Lower East Wing cataloguer." Caius returned his attention to the survey map. "It has been sent. I did not deliver it." A pause. He looked up again. "Why not?" "Because I found something in the Deep Archive that you need to read before it is delivered." Edric set the document on the survey table. 87 years ago, Regent Thessaly Dawn commissioned a chemical suppression of a mate bond. The bond belonged to the crown prince of that generation. The compound used was the grey preparation. According to the attending physician's record, which is in the archive, and which has not, as far as I can determine, ever been shown to you, the grey preparation does not terminate a bond. It places it in dormancy. The bond remains. It waits for its true anchor. The room was very quiet. Caius Valanthor had gone still, in a way that was different from his ordinary stillness. His ordinary stillness was the composed containment of a man who had learned to hold power without broadcasting it. This was something else. This was the stillness of someone who had just been handed a sentence that was restructuring something inside him as he read it. "The wolf," he said. "Yes." The wolf chose. "Yes." He picked up the document. He read it. His face did not move. But his hands, Edric noted, did not move either. He was holding the document with a steadiness that required something. "The bond is not new," Edric said, because he understood that someone needed to say this directly, and that there was no one else in the room. "The bond is 87 years old. It was suppressed without the knowledge of the man it belonged to. What happened in the Great Hall was not a new awakening. It was a completion. The wolf found what the suppression had been keeping from it." Caius set the document down. "Where is she now?" "In the lower east wing, sorting acquisition records." Edric retrieved his coat. "She knows the removal notice was coming. She chose not to leave before it arrived. I thought that was something you should know about her character, since her character does not appear in any of the administrative documentation." He was at the door when Caius spoke again. "Why did she stay?" Edric paused. He had, in 4 hours, and a visit to the deep archive, formed a fairly precise view of Mira Callanth. He chose his words with the care the question deserved. "I believe," he said, "that she has been in this archive for 7 years, and she has built something here that matters to her. And I believe she decided that she was not going to allow the machinery to remove her from a place she had built, simply because a woman with more institutional standing than her found her inconvenient." He opened the door. "I also believe, though she did not say this directly, that she did not entirely understand what had happened in the Great Hall, but she knew it was real, and she was not going to leave without knowing what it meant." He left. Caius came to the lower east wing at the 4th hour of the afternoon. Mira heard the door and did not look up. She had learned, in 7 years, to assess arrivals by the quality of their footstep, the pace, the weight, the degree of intention. The footstep that crossed the threshold of the acquisition alcove was not Edric's, which she had been half expecting. It was heavier, and it paused in a way that heavier footsteps in the lower east wing did not usually pause. They usually swept through or turned around. This one stayed. She looked up. He was taller than he appeared at distances. She had only seen him at distances, crossing the grounds at the far end of the great hall during formal assemblies, once from an upper window when he had been walking the perimeter wall early in the morning with his wolf at his side. Up close, he filled the door frame in a way that was not aggressive, but was entirely unavoidable. He was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. Not coldness, not the careful blankness of the court. Something more specific than either. Something that looked like a man doing the work of seeing something clearly. "You are Mira Callanth," he said. "Yes." He looked at the acquisition room, at the sorted stacks, the cataloguing sheets, the precise order she had imposed on a space that had been, when she inherited it, a random accumulation of unlogged material that no one had dealt with for a decade. "My archivist tells me you built the Provenance Cross-Reference System." "Yes." That was not a small project. She recognized that sentence. Edric had said the same thing. She wondered if Edric had put it in his report deliberately, knowing it would be repeated. "It took 14 months, she said. He moved into the room, not toward her. He stopped near the shelving against the east wall, a careful distance, looking at the tagged and sorted stacks. He also brought me a record from the deep archive. She waited. My grandmother commissioned a chemical suppression of my bond when I was a crown prince, before I had any awareness of it. I was 19. He was still looking at the shelves. According to the attending physician's record, the compound she used does not terminate the bond. It puts it in dormancy. A pause. I have been living with a suppressed bond for 87 years without knowing. She set her pen down. And the wolf, she said. The wolf knows what I did not. The acquisition room was quiet. Outside, the afternoon was moving toward the cold hour, and she could hear the distant sound of the outer court settling into the late shift. The small sounds of the archive that she had come to know better than any other sounds in the world. I received a removal notice today, she said. I signed it without the correct information. He turned from the shelf. His eyes were dark, the irises a grey that read as almost colourless in certain angles of light, and they were on her with a quality of attention she had not previously been the subject of. It will be withdrawn. Lady Alindra filed the petition before the council. I know. The council has already acknowledged receipt. The machinery is running. I know how the machinery works. A beat. Something almost dry in his tone. I have been operating it for 11 years. She nearly said something. She held it. What will you do about the council petition? She asked instead. I will appear before the council with the archivist's record, and I will explain the relevant facts. He came further into the room and stopped near the spare chair that Edric had used that morning. He did not sit. He looked at her with the directness of someone who had decided something and was now doing the harder work of communicating it clearly. I am not going to make institutional decisions based on incomplete information, and I am not going to remove someone from a position they have earned, because removing them is more convenient than understanding what is actually happening. Mira looked at the letter she had known was coming, which was now not coming, which was, she was aware, a different kind of problem, because the machinery had been running, and withdrawing from the machinery required a different order of action than never entering it. The council will require a formal response to the petition, she said. Yes. Lady Alindra's petition cites 3 institutional grounds. The first is proximity to the selection process. The second is status incompatibility. The third is what she has characterized as an anomalous event with the king's wolf that she is framing as a deliberate action on my part. She watched his face. I did not plan for the wolf to find me. I was counting candelabras. The dry thing in his expression returned briefly. I know. The setup crew confirmed this independently. She had not known there had been independent confirmation. You had the event investigated, she said. I had the event documented, before anyone could characterize it incorrectly in a formal record. He pulled the chair out and sat down, which was notable because she had not seen him sit down in any context where she was also present, which meant the social transaction was now different. What Lady Alindra has characterized as a deliberate action on your part was a spontaneous response from my wolf that had nothing to do with your intention. A beat. My wolf is not her institutional property. Neither am I. Mira looked at her hands. The ink on her wrist had dried hours ago. There was a woman, she said, 87 years ago, the woman the bond was suppressed to prevent. Lena, a healer's assistant. The record does not say what happened to her after the suppression was administered. Does the record say whether she was told? Whether she knew the bond was suppressed? He was quiet for a moment. No, it does not say. Mira thought about that, about a woman who had felt something real, and then felt it go quiet, and had spent the rest of her life not knowing why. She deserved to know, she said. Yes, Caius said. She did. They sat in the acquisition room as the afternoon continued to darken and the archive settled into its evening sounds, and Mira thought about 87 years and what it meant for a thing to wait, and what it meant to find something you had not known you had lost. The council hearing was 3 days later. Mira arrived with the deep archive record, which Edric had formally transferred to the council file that morning. She arrived without an advocate, because she did not have one. She arrived wearing her archive coat, dark wool, fraying at the left cuff, ink on the right sleeve, because it was what she had, and because she had decided, at some point in the 3 days since Caius had come to the acquisition room, that she was not going to perform a version of herself that was sized for other people's comfort. The council chamber was a long room with high-backed chairs and a gallery of formal portraits that watched from every wall. Lady Alindra Selvar, Mira used her actual name now, having learned it from the petition documents, sat at the council's formal recommendation table with 2 advocates and a prepared document that ran to 11 pages. She was elegant, composed, and looked at Mira with the particular expression of someone who had done extensive institutional groundwork and was confident in the outcome. The presiding councillor, Lord Davin, read the petition summary. He then looked at Mira. "The petitioned party may respond." Mira set the deep archive record on the table in front of her. "Before I address the 3 cited grounds," she said, "I would ask the council to review the document I have submitted. It is a physician's record from 87 years ago, held in the Palace Deep Archive under Classification 9, subsection 4. I would ask the council to note the date, the signatory, and the notation in the left margin beginning on page 3. The councillors received copies. Lord Davin read. His expression moved through several stages. "This document," he said slowly, "describes a chemical suppression of the Alpha King's bond," Mira said, "administered without his knowledge or consent at age 19, by order of Regent Thessaly Dawn. The physician's notation documents that the grey preparation used does not terminate the bond, but places it in dormancy. The notation further states that a suppressed bond, when it locates its true anchor, does not begin from the point of first meeting. It completes from the point of suppression." The council chamber was very quiet. Lady Alindra's advocate leaned toward her. She did not move. "The first cited ground for removal," Mira continued, "is proximity to the selection process. I would submit that the selection process, as currently constituted, is proceeding without information that is materially relevant to its legitimacy. Specifically, the Alpha King's bond has been active, in a suppressed state, for 87 years. It is not a new bond. It is not an anomalous event. It is the completion of something that was interrupted without the knowledge of the man it belonged to." She paused. "The second cited ground is status incompatibility. I am Omega ranked and lower house. That is accurate. I am also the architect of the Archive's Provenance Cross-Reference System, a 7-year institutional contributor, and the individual with whom the Alpha King's wolf, acting on a bond that predates anyone in this room, has identified a completed connection. Status is a social construct. It is not a supernatural mechanic. The bond does not check the administrative register." Lady Alindra was very still. "The third cited ground," Mira said, "is the characterization of the event in the Great Hall as a deliberate action on my part. I was counting candelabras. The wolf was not summoned. The event was documented by 4 witnesses before any formal characterization was filed." She closed the document in front of her. "I am not asking the council for a preference. I am presenting the record. The record is clear. The petition is built on the absence of information that the Deep Archive has held for 87 years. I am asking the council to make its decision with the full information now in front of it." She sat down. Lord Davin looked at the document. He looked at Lady Alindra's advocate. He looked at the other council members. Then the door at the rear of the chamber opened, and Caius Valanthor came in. He did not say anything immediately. He came to the front of the chamber, stood beside the table where Mira was seated, and looked at the council with the expression of a man who had made a decision and was now simply making it visible. "The record the cataloguer has submitted is accurate," he said. "I have read it. I have reviewed the physician's notation. I am formally withdrawing the removal order, and I am asking the Council to strike the petition on grounds of material misrepresentation, specifically the characterization of the Great Hall event as anomalous, when the documented evidence establishes it as the completion of a bond that has been in suppressed state for 87 years. Lord Davon cleared his throat. Lady Elindra's petition also cites the ongoing selection process as... "The selection process is concluded," Caius said. The chamber was very quiet for a long moment. Lady Elindra Selvar stood. She was composed. She had the particular composure of someone who understood that the institutional ground had shifted beneath them and was calculating the correct response. She said, very precisely, "The Council should note that I filed in good faith, acting on information available at the time. I withdraw the petition." She gathered her papers. "I wish the archive well." She left. The Council voted. The petition was struck. Mira stayed at her cataloguing table until the evening bell. She was not sure what else to do. The acquisition room had been her world for 7 years, and its rhythms did not change because the council chamber had voted or the institutional machinery had reversed. The courier records still needed their provenance tags. The winter acquisition stack was still approximately 60 items behind on classification. The work was the work. Edric came in at the 6th hour. He set a cup of tea on the table beside her catalogue sheet without saying anything. He sat in the spare chair. "You did not keep the evidence for yourself," he said. "I was not sure I would need it," she said. "I filed it with the council record before the hearing." "That was a risk." "I know. I decided that if I kept it as personal insurance, I was operating on the same logic the petition was operating on. I did not want to." She picked up the tea. It was still warm. "How did you know where to look in the deep archive?" "I have been in the archive for 40 years, he said. "I know where the things people do not want found are kept. They are always in the same kind of place, filed correctly, because the people who know the right classification are always careful, but filed in the section that requires the most effort to reach." He looked at the ceiling. Thessaly Dawn was careful. She was also very certain that no one would go looking, which is a different thing from ensuring no one could. Mira thought about that. "Thank you," she said, "for not delivering the letter." "I have never failed to complete an assignment," Edric said mildly, "but I have occasionally taken the time to determine whether the assignment was based on complete information." He stood. "The provenance cross-reference system is, in my professional opinion, the most significant structural improvement to this archive in 20 years. I find it difficult to see the logic in removing the person who built it." He left. Mira sat in the quiet of the acquisition room, and outside the windows the palace settled into its night sounds, and the wolf she could hear occasionally on the grounds below, the heavy paw fall, the particular rhythm she had come to recognize, moved through the dark outside, and she worked until the candle needed changing, and then she worked by the new light. It was 6 weeks after the council hearing when Caius came to the acquisition room again. He came in the morning, which was when she was usually there, and she heard his footstep before she saw him, and she knew it immediately because she had learned it. He sat in the spare chair without asking, which she had noticed he had done every time since the first time, and she had decided this was his version of making himself ordinary in the space. He had been coming by the acquisition room 3 or 4 times a week since the council hearing. He did not always say much. He sometimes read from the documents she was working with, which were frequently more interesting than administrative papers, because old acquisition records told you things about who had cared about what and when, and he seemed to find that interesting in the way she did. He had a dry, minimal way of commenting on things that she had come to recognize as the outer edge of how he expressed engagement with something. This morning, he set a document on the table. "The Northern Road Assessment," he said. "The council wants it by the end of the month. I think the survey methodology is incomplete." He looked at her. You catalogued the historic road survey records from the last 3 cycles. Yes. I would like your opinion on whether the current methodology addresses the same variables. She picked up the document. She read the first 3 pages, while he sat with a cup of water he had brought and looked at the acquisition stacks. Outside the narrow window, the morning was clear and cold, the kind of cold that came in off the northern ranges in the 2nd month and stayed until it was ready to leave. The last cycle used a 3-point elevation sampling, she said. This one uses a single point. That is going to miss the degradation patterns on the crossings. She turned to page 4. Also, the material classification is wrong. They are using the old stone grading, not the updated one from 14 years ago. I thought the same thing, he said. Did you read the last 3 cycle records? I read the summaries. He paused. I did not read the originals. The originals have the methodology annotations. The summaries are edited down to conclusions. She set the document on the table and picked up her pen. I can pull the originals from classification 7 and mark the relevant sections. It would take about an hour. I have until midday, he said. She pulled the records. She marked the sections. He read them at her table with the same quality of attention he brought to everything. Deliberate, unhurried, the kind of reading that went back to clarify rather than moving forward to finish quickly. She returned to her cataloguing. They worked in the same room in the comfortable silence of people who had grown used to each other's working sounds. Mira, he said, after a time. She looked up. He was looking at the document, but not reading it. He was in the small pause of someone choosing words with intention. The wolf, he said, chose before I understood what it was choosing. I am asking you now, with the understanding of what the record means, what the suppression means, what 87 years of waiting means, whether you want to stay. He looked up. Not because the bond chose you, because I am choosing you, because you catalogued 14 months of provenance work without anyone acknowledging it, because you walked into a council chamber with a document and presented it without performance or request for sympathy, and the council voted in 11 minutes, because you come to this room every morning and the work you do here is real and good, and I find this room better when you are in it. A pause. Those are different reasons than the bond. I want you to have them. The acquisition room was very quiet. Outside, she could hear the wolf on the grounds below. The familiar rhythm of it, the heavy, settled pace of something moving through its own territory at ease. I had decided to stay regardless, she said. I know. But I would like the reasons. She picked up her pen. I would like to know the difference between being kept because the bond chose me and being wanted because of the work. They are not mutually exclusive, he said. No, she said, but one of them I can trust without reservation. He looked at her for a moment, and the expression on his face was one she had been learning to read across 6 weeks of mornings. A precise, unhurried acknowledgement, the expression of a man who found accuracy satisfying rather than uncomfortable. Then trust it, he said. I am not offering you a choice between the bond and the reasons. I am telling you that both are real, and that I prefer you to have the full information. She looked at her ink-stained wrist. She looked at the acquisition stacks behind him, which were approximately 40 items further along than they had been 6 weeks ago. I will stay, she said. Good, he said, and they returned to work. That was 4 months ago. Now it is the deep cold of the 3rd month, and the acquisition room has 2 chairs instead of 1. Someone requisitioned the 2nd from the 3rd floor stores, and Mira is not certain who did it, but she suspects Edric. The wolf comes inside in the mornings sometimes, which was apparently not something it had done before 6 months ago, and it has developed a habit of pressing its side against Mira's chair while she catalogues, which is warming in ways that are practical as well as otherwise. Caius brings her the reports he is uncertain about. He has explained this as utilitarian. She has read more of the historical record than most of the council combined, and her pattern recognition for administrative methodology is genuinely useful, and she has accepted this explanation because it is accurate, and also because she has come to understand that offering useful information is his version of intimacy. He tells her things as reports: the state of the northern roads, the council member who has been blocking the Eastern Water Initiative for 3 years out of what appears to be personal history with the initiative's author, his precise and considered opinion of the new survey methodology, which he has reviewed in full and found adequate but not excellent. He offers these as data. She receives them as what they are. She still has ink on her wrist. Her boots still let in the cold on the worst mornings, though a pair appeared outside her door 3 weeks ago that do not, and she is wearing them. The archive coat has been replaced by a heavier one, the same dark wool, without the frayed cuff, and she has already begun accruing ink on the right sleeve. In the deep archive, the physician's record has been removed from classification 9, subsection 4, and formally recatalogued under the Velenthor lineage records with a full provenance annotation and a note that the suppression was administered without the subject's knowledge or consent. Mira wrote the annotation herself. She used precise language. The small glass case on the shelf above her cataloguing table holds the grey preparation vial, recovered from the deep archive physician's cabinet, sealed, labelled, and placed where she can see it, not as a reminder of what was done, as documentation, as the habit she has that will not change. Things that happened deserve to be recorded accurately. The wolf's tail moves sometimes when it is resting against her chair. Not often, not dramatically. Just the slow back and forth of something that has been looking for something for a very long time and has stopped looking. Edric comes in on Fridays and drinks tea and reads the acquisition tags and periodically notes that the provenance cross-reference system saved him 12 minutes on a retrieval task, which he says as if it is new information every time. She suspects he does it deliberately. She has not told him this, because it seems like the kind of thing that would embarrass him, and she has no interest in embarrassing him. The court does not know exactly what to do with her. There are council members who still do not look directly at her when she enters rooms, and there are courtiers who have developed a formal, slightly overcompensating cordiality that is worse than the not seeing, but is, she supposes, movement in a direction. Lady Alindra Selvar is still on the council. She is competent, and she knows it, and Mira has no particular feeling about her beyond the professional acknowledgement that competent people are more interesting to navigate than incompetent ones. They have worked together, twice, on administrative matters that required archive input. It has been functional. The mornings are her favourite. Before the palace is fully awake, when the acquisition room holds only the cold light coming through the narrow window, and the sound of Caius working 2 pages over, and the weight of the wolf against her chair, and the particular quiet of a place where the work is real, and the person doing it is no longer invisible. That is what invisible to recognized means, finally. Not that the court sees her. It does, imperfectly, in ways that will keep shifting for a long time. Not that she is celebrated or positioned, or any of the things she never wanted. It means that the people who matter have found where she is, and are not going to lose track of her again. She picks up her pen. The winter acquisition stack has 31 items left. She begins. Tell me something. If the person who was supposed to remove you from a place you'd built turned out to be the only one who looked closely enough to fight for you to stay, would you have trusted the reasons they gave you? Or would you have needed to see it proven first?